We're starting with points of interest. Last week, we talked about Planet Tech V5, which actually includes a big overhaul to points of interest, but we didn't really get to that. This week, we're going to jump into that part of it. And they are jokingly calling it Starchitect because CIG. But this is actually, in my opinion, a big reason why CIG should seriously consider scaling up the size of their planets. So, maybe they will, maybe they won't. They've kind of hinted at the possibility, but we're going to start all the way at the beginning. This is well before we even had, like, let me go back. Let's look back real quick at what was going on at the time that we're about to look at, because Star Citizen has changed so much since then, and it's been a while, so it's not like that impressive, but it's easy to forget how freaking bare the game was at that time. So this is back in 2020, specifically, I think summer of 2020. 3.10 was coming out. What did 3.10 have in it? The ability to send money to each other. These are the features. These are the features that we were getting at that time. So it was like the game was still just getting some level of foundation. They were building the law system a little bit. They were working on turret stuff, methodology for targeting. This was actually back when they were also trying to force speeds to go down through gameplay mechanics, rather than just putting a cap on speed limits for SCM flight and ships. And then restricted area reworks, those were funny. They were adding new Babbage at the time. So Levski had just left, new Babbage had been added in, and we were still getting FPS weapons. But this was the time period here. And I think it wasn't too far before this, maybe like just a few updates beforehand. Yeah, that they added the ability to rent ships into the game. Yeah. So we didn't even have an inventory at this time. You can see here the next update had the inventory. So like, it's hard to, it's easy to look at Star Citizen now and be like, oh my god. And trust me, I still am. There's plenty of things in this game that I think we should have, but whew, 2020, we didn't even have, all we had were bunkers. In fact, let me show you this video here. So here's 2018. This is them talking about their first kind of ground-based points of interest we were getting missions in, and I kid you not, these we still play in, and they were only made because of a CitizenCon demo. Yes, they fit what was needed for Star Citizen, so they continued with them and used them, but in general, these locations were kind of designed for a very specific purpose.
The rest stops interiors have been set up.
We really wanted it to plug into the layout tool that's been used to create the rest stops that we've seen in previous ATVs.
You start with a library of rooms, and then those rooms get configured in different ways.
Okay, so first thing he said there already is that they are using the space station system to make this. And the space station system is not what they use to make ground locations anymore. They use Rastar, which we've talked about a lot. You can find tons of information about this. It is their own point of interest building system. They use it to make ground locations. You guys might remember, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, they actually had to come back into these ground locations and redo them. I'm not sure if that's even listed on here. But you might remember they had to come back into these ground locations and redo them with the Rastar system just to make sure that they worked. So here are the new derelict settlements that they made with Rastar. And then at some point they also just redid the bunkers. And it was just listed as a line item. It wasn't a big deal. But they had dedicated a whole Inside Star Citizen to talking about it. You guys can go back and watch that if you want. But that just goes to show how, like, back then they were building these systems and these locations and stuff with a system that was not meant for the actual game. All of this that they were doing back then was just to try and get people to play the game. Kind of like what they're doing right now. It's actually, it's interesting how we have that parallel. Right after 3.0, they were just focused on trying to get as many features into the game as they could to get people to stay interested. Now they're trying to get as much content into the game as they can to keep people interested. The same kind of energy.
So you can get a variety of layouts from the same set of rooms.
Once I had that layout, it was all about talking to the AI combat code guys and being like, what are the actions the AI can take? Of course, I can lay out this path, but it doesn't matter if I put like a massive wall in and expect the AI to bust through it if they can't do that. So I really had to take into consideration the skills and also the weapons the AI had. Because of course you have different ranges and all of this stuff. And the idea for that was that we'd have an end room, and that really dictated the layout and how all of the cover would work and how the player and the AI navigate in that space.
As we've seen in the PTU, we have combat AI in Korea right now. So Korea and the underground facilities were our first test cases. Before that, we only had test levels created by us, which were just like white box levels.
So we're literally seeing the beginning of FPS in Star Citizen here.
Greatest challenge here was ensure that the AI played to a realistic standard.
But I'm kind of getting into a completely different topic that I had lined up, which was the mission development. That was really just to give you guys an idea of this is where things started in terms of points of interest in Star Citizen. Outside of landing zones, those bunkers were the very first. And now that I think of it, I actually want to pull up one more video just to drive that reference home. So this is basically explaining why they made those facilities.
Let's talk about the original underground facilities. Now, the problem was we made these originally for the CitizenCon presentation demo, and the time we had wasn't enough to kind of take the location where we wanted it to
So that's kind of confirmation that it was made for the demo.
be. Now, it kind of fits the current purpose. It's fairly small in scale. It gives a multi-room layout opportunity for FPS combat, but we always knew we wanted it to be able to scale, small, medium, large, to accommodate maybe 60 minutes of gameplay time per location.
Okay.
So how do we go about designing?
That is where it all began. All right. We got our baseline. We're at ground zero. Yes, they had a couple of outposts. No. Yeah, they had a couple of outposts that we used, like on Daymar in the Moons of Crusader. But those bunkers, that was where it started. Now, let's move on from there. This is the very first time we saw any sort of point of interest development from Star Citizen as the new age of the game was starting, kind of.
Way into the Star Citizen persistent universe. Finally, several weeks ago, we showcased some initial concept explorations for homesteads, frontier housing to be found out in the wilderness areas of undeveloped planets and moons. And there were a lot to choose from. So the next step has been to turn some of those 2D sketches that we really liked into 3D sketches in Blender to further explore the to choose from.
Any of these that you guys like more? Actually, let's see if we can go back and find the video he's talking about so we can get a little bit more eyes on the... Yeah, because this isn't... I thought that was the first one. 2020. We're going to go back and look at those concepts because I want to know what you guys like, if you can spot the ones that you think they moved forward with, because these are the outposts we're seeing added to Pyro right now. That was the first real attempt at these. And it's funny that it took... What is this, 5 years? 5 years for them to get into the game? I always laugh at the idea that Pyro was going to be in the game in like 2022 because, well, these outposts were definitely not ready. So Pyro would have just been a bare wasteland that whole time. So here are those 2D sketches.
Returning down planetside, early concept explorations are underway on the creation of homesteads, habitats and homes for NPCs that may one day dot across the surface of planets and moons throughout the Stanton system and beyond.
This gives me Oblivion vibes. You guys ever watch that movie? Freaking love that movie. And what's the best part about that movie? Tom Cruise. No, don't shoot me. I'm not Tom Cruise. Jesus. I love that movie though.
Now these thumbnail sketches are an invaluable first step in any concept process.
I think you can kind of see where this would have gone to Pyro.
And as usual, they're explorations only. That means that while
Sketch
several
3.
of them may be chosen to make the next step into full-on development, the reality is that many of these may die here as solid examples of simply what we don't want.
Dude, like these are such... Look at this. Oops. Wrong one. This is so just straight out of Oblivion. I love this. I really hope we see stuff like this. That like bulbous weird monolithic structures they did in that movie.
Want to do. Such is the way for thumbnail sketches.
All right. So those are the sketches. And then from there, we finally moved on. They moved on to this.
Well, a
Here we
lot
go.
to choose from. So the next step has been to turn some of those 2D sketches that we really liked into 3D sketches in Blender to further explore the shape language, to see these things from as many different angles as possible, and to begin to build out a library of kit bash options for us to play with.
And this
At
was
this
around the
stage,
time.
one of the main things we're looking for in fleshing out this colonial architectural vibe visually is
It's
that
Tatooine.
it looks like it can survive in many different climates. Perhaps with a patching motif that indicates generations of use instead of the outright replacement of components that could keep them looking newer. As far as shape language, these efforts will also be used to help us land on a specific direction of cubical, conical, spherical, or some mix therein. Like most concepts, these visual explorations are just as important in figuring out what we do want as determining what we do not. Also under consideration are the materials that would be used to make these structures, as there's a desire within the team here to make the materials found in the walls or rooftops appear as if they were sourced from the planet where any homestead is found whenever possible. Overall, this is one of the most enjoyable periods for any concept artist, a time where it's more about exploring primitive forms and building shape relationships between core elements, researching traversal options and how they'll settle within the environment around them, and perhaps most importantly, working hand in hand with system designers to identify all the necessary gameplay components and the relational hierarchy necessary between them, so that when development of this feature really kicks into high gear, we'll all be creating something from the ground up that can build upon and utilize the full complexity of the resource generation and item control system we discussed last quarter on Calling All Devs that is currently in development for ships, vehicles, and space stations alike.
So that is, I think, one of the more interesting parts of this is that we're like the resource network that we kind of have only really focused on in the last year, and is still not even in the game, is being considered at the concept stage for these locations. And that is not something CIG would have done prior to this. I mean, that's something we can see in a lot of the old locations. They're just not made to work with that kind of system. And freaking thank God they did, because you just don't want to like get these locations and then be like, okay, now I got to update them so that they work with the power systems that we've created. I'm just glad they were at least considering that. This is around the time, though, everybody was like, okay, these seem like they're meant to kind of be like Tatooine a little bit. You got the vibe a little bit there. Can't imagine why. Alrighty.
So what did we learn about this week?
What did we learn? Dude, his audio has gotten so much better since then. So that's the beginning stages of these places being built out. Now we jump forward a little bit and we're talking a little bit more about specialized locations. And these got me a lot more interested back then, because these actually started to, if you look over here on the right, they referenced the interaction points. So you could see that they were starting to consider the gameplay, how these would fit maybe into the resource network or missions or contracts that you had to do at these locations.
And to wrap things up this week, let's check in once again with the team working on colonialism-style homesteads. And we have some additional concepting for a variety of add-ons to be found throughout the various encampments, like these cooling stations for enormous server racks, power plants with varying arrays of subcomponents like antenna, piping, displays, ladders, and more.
Kind of funny because I do see these assets at Pyro, but they're not interactive right now.
Subcomponents like antenna, piping, displays, ladders, and more. Fuel tank arrays with a variety of blockouts altering the way in which they connect with one another as they expand out across the horizon.
Yeah, we blow these up.
Solar array add-ons for both the power plants we saw before and habitat buildings themselves.
actually a bit annoyed that these don't have fuses in
Refinery
them.
units. And finally, potential blockouts for combining many of those aspects into outdoor storage yards that will form the basis for a wide variety of NPC and player experiences in the future.
This is like this. A lot of this is foundation for things even like distribution centers. You know, this refinery, like you can tell that this is part of the distribution center exteriors. So this stuff did go to more than the outposts, but overall, this was just a big part of the process of, I think, them getting their pipeline together to start creating libraries for ground locations. And hopefully they can expand to other types of archetypes, or architectural archetypes. We've seen that Castra is coming along. Castra is henoistic in nature rather than utilitarian. I'm sure you all are more than aware of my my little diagram. It's not mine, I saved it, but it's one that they released. It's official for the game, and it's meant to contextualize what these locations represent based on... Man, why are you opening my pictures in Affinity? So this is the timeline for human development in Star Citizen. I'm going to add music to this so I'm not awkward. And you can see that this right here is literally the Rayari outpost from the current game. So we know we have high-tech architecture, and we kind of can see it in Microtech too a little bit. We know we have utilitarian architecture because, like, look at ArcCorp and Lorville. They're very into that. It's just like exposed piping and stuff like that. That's also going to be at Levski. Colonialism architecture, if you didn't catch on, is what Jared's been talking about this whole time. Frontier vibe, natural resources, he even mentioned. It's all about where did the resources come from. Derelict archetypes, we know that because we have derelict outposts in the game. So those three are taken care of, somewhat, in some ways. And Henoism is bunker style, conveys security. This happened during the time of the Messers when we were at 3 different wars. We had 2 wars with the Tavaran and a Cold War with the Xian at the time, I think. So everything was very war related, and you guys saw that when they introduced Castra during CitizenCon. So that'll be 4 architecture types by the time we see Castra. And they are trying to find ways, I think, to both make assets that fit these archetypes for outposts. They're going to have to make them for cities, like Lorville, or what's the one that's called? Cascom? And just in general for the high-tech cities like Microtech. And then they also have to hit those other ones that we saw. There are like 2... God dang, Affinity again. There are, I think, 2 or 3 other streamline, metaclassicism, and supermodernism that they'll have to flesh out as well. And maybe that changes, but that's at least what they laid out back then. So back to this.
Now we'll start learning more about how these homesteads will begin being integrated into the persistent universe in the coming months. So
that was a teaser of Rastar. So moving on from that, I'm going to make a huge jump ahead. That was 2021. We're jumping forward to 2023. At this point, we had started to see... Actually, hold on. We can maybe not jump forward quite that far just yet. I could show you what they wanted to show us as an update real quick. Here. So from there, they did a lot of work on it. Things really started to speed up at one point, and they actually went and made a little bit of a sizzle reel just to give an idea of what it's going to look like in the actual game. All right. Rest of this is just space stations. You get the idea. So that was a little bit of an ad for where they were going with the ground locations. And that was 2022. From there, we obviously got more updates on Inside Star Citizen and stuff, but really the next big update was finally this presentation at CitizenCon in 2023. I'm gonna let him do a lot of the talking here, because I think this is actually one of the more important talks to show the direction they're going in with this. It'll be echoed again the following year with the whole point of this talk, which is Starchitect. But really it starts here in how they're explaining the way that they're developing these ground locations. We'll jump in here every now and then.
So all of that beautiful tech, all of those features that we've seen in the last 2 days is coming from our tech development builds. Now, all those features are going to make their way to you, of course, eventually. But that is the reason you're not going to see some of them in the builds today. I just wanted to get ahead of the comments a little bit there. So with that said, what am I going to be talking about? Well, I'm really excited to show you that the hard work that the Sandbox One team have been doing to expand our new outpost locations. I'm going to start by going over how we've expanded the library and what that means we can now achieve with the new locations, and then how we achieve that variety from the library by categorizing our locations into both archetypes and themes, and what that means for you as a player. So, I don't know if you remember this, but at SitCon in 2021, we showed this new style of outpost for the first time. Now,
that is a video we should have watched before this.
At this point, we had our art style locked in. We'd worked on our library of content to the point where we could make smaller locations like this one, but with a limited amount of variety between each one. And this is...
Okay. This is, I think, the biggest thing that they're trying to do. This is what I meant by the whole expanding the different archetypes thing. We can't, like, we're going to have a whole bunch of star systems using these assets, right? So they've got to expand these like crazy. And I think this is a good first showing, but as we'll see with Starchitect, it's got to go much further.
This is what that library of modules looked like at that point. We'd established our main building modules, as well as some of our larger buildings and a number of smaller secondary and dressing and standalone modules. But each outpost couldn't be too large without there being some obvious repetition between the modules used. So let's have a look at that library today. So, in order to achieve that greater visual and design delta between each outpost and have them not feel like exact clones of one another, we've massively expanded our module library in terms of breadth and depth. And what I mean that, we go broad by making more modules with different purposes, and we go deep by creating multiple thematic overlays for each of those modules as well. And I'll go into what that means a little bit in a minute. But the challenge of a sandbox location like this, as you can see, it's not about building a single unique location. That can be quite straightforward, to be fair. It's about giving our artists and designers the building blocks, the affordance to build multiple locations that all feel somewhat different, even if they do share that same basic DNA. So it's about creating both the ingredients at the same time as the recipes, and making sure all of those flavors work in harmony with one another for both visuals and gameplay. So every individual part has to take into consideration all of those design philosophies. So every single module has to take into consideration those design philosophies that Khan mentioned. But we also have to make sure that they work with those same principles when an artist or a designer combines them into any one of a number of different layouts. So the more ingredients we have to work with, the more recipes we can create. But with that complexity comes the challenge of keeping everything harmonious.
I wish that we got to see this for the utilitarian art style. Colonialism is cool. Like it fits Pyro and it looks nice and all that, and it's natural stuff, whatever. But utilitarian stuff, especially old utilitarian stuff on moons with like the weathering and stuff, I don't know. There's something nice about that. Something crunchy sci-fi about it. Can't wait to see new outposts that are not colonial, but are also larger than like the little stilt one-room outposts that we have in Stanton right now.
We like to think we've done a pretty good job with that. but that's me. Using this expanded library, we've been able to increase the individual location size because there's less of that obvious repetition between buildings within any single location. And we can't really call some of these large locations outposts anymore. They become something more like settlements and imply a larger and more established community. Now, as a player, it will mean a lot more to explore and do at any single individual location with a localized and personal feeling mission types that might see you moving around a single settlement to complete objectives or doing short hop missions between clusters of settlements on a single planet. So you might head up to a ridge to repair some wind turbines. You could counter an outlaw attack from a neighboring outpost, or on the opposite side, you might be stealing or destroying vehicles for the criminal gang that you're working for. But in the art department, we always say, show, don't tell. So let's stop looking at slides and let's have a look at some of the locations in game.
Honestly, I'm still waiting for that kind of mission combinations. Like, they're there, and it's just that the handyman missions don't work well enough, and the mission spawning still isn't localized enough. We're so close to that, but it still doesn't do that. And I can't wait till it does, but man, they really got to get that working. So you guys, we know these locations now. I still don't see them that much because I just think Pyro really needs, there are like multiple things that I think need some more help to make Pyro play smoothly. It's still kind of just in this place. Dang it, I'm sorry, I realized that the music was playing the whole time. It's still just in a place where it's like fun to see, fun to look at, not quite cohesive just yet. But that was just a little bit of a look at where they were going with the locations. Now this is the more interesting part, how they're going to kind of diversify them.
Thank you. So what flavors of Outpost did we just see there? Well, we categorize them in two different ways, as I said, and then we mix and match those categories together to provide that variation. Now, the first and primary category is the archetype, and they provide that core gameplay hook and define the main function of a settlement. So scrapyards have a landing pit module for repairs and refueling. Mining operations can have a refinery module and ore extractors for resource and commodity trading. And trading posts themselves allow a broader range of item purchases through the...
I'd like to point out that they also earlier this year made a distinction between outposts and depots. They are now defining depots as single-purpose small locations, kind of like what we have in Stanton right now, where you land there and it's basically just a trading depot, and you can get some stuff and then take off, as opposed to outposts, which are like more of the kind of multi-purpose towns where you can maybe get a repair, get something to trade, also find some NPCs, possible mission givers, and some things to do.
The dedicated trade building module. And I mentioned earlier some more like general mission types that you might find that would be agnostic of archetype. And the archetypes themselves reflect that primary gameplay function of a settlement, but there's also a middle layer. Of course, we don't want these locations to just be a glorified shop or repair station. So there's to be more secondary activities to do locally to an outpost that are also defined by its archetype. So you may find scrapyards can offer salvage-related gameplay and missions. Trading posts can also offer delivery missions or hauling and cargo gameplay. And farms can offer crops and fauna as resources for gathering or trading. So with archetypes as our primary category, in addition, we mix in a secondary category, and these are the thematic overlays. Now, at the moment, we have two main themes. Internally, we call these independent and outlaw. So themes offer additional variation on top of the archetypes to inform the look and feel of a location. Not
Dude,
just
this
visually,
thing just looks like
but which
this thing just looks like a gigantic pizza oven. Like these pirates are just making the bombest 5 cheese pizzas in here. And then you come in and murder them all, and you're the criminal.
people you'll interact with there, how they'll respond to you based on your rep, what types of missions you'll have available to take on. So themes don't change the fundamental architecture of a space or the archetype of a location, but they do drastically alter the mood and feel, as well as altering the gameplay experience significantly. And again, let's take a look at the first of our themes, our independent theme.
That was actual Space Pizza Hut. Just got a gigantic ship weapon on my bookshelf. Grandma, can you pass the freaking tarantula, please? Oh, and then this thing.
Cool.
Yay!
So, as a neutral player, the independent theme presents a much more social, visual, and gameplay experience. The primary visual read across both themes, so across both Outlaw and Independent, comes from those common architectural forms, and they're generally all more rounded and soft in shape, and the building manufacture techniques are more robust and primitive, with single-story dwellings built from stucco and bare metal. But for this theme specifically, we use soft textiles, warm lighting and color palettes, foliage, decoration that layer on top of those utilitarian structures to give that sense of home. And I use the word home for our independent theme quite a lot because we really want to get that feeling that this is home for the people that live there despite those harsh realities of frontier life. And in contrast to that, we have a theme that lies in a direct opposition to the independence, which we call the Outlaw theme. So let's take a look at that now as well.
Edgy. Outlaws aren't soft, they're hard. Sorry. There's the pizza kitchen. Oh, they got meats too, nice. Nice. He gonna die.
So the Outlaw theme tells that story of these once functional settlements being completely overrun by the various criminal elements that inhabit the system. And visually, we have themes of a regressed and subverted civilization. So we layer on top of the architecture these spiked and aggressive forms, and we have evidence of a squalid living arrangements, and lighting comes from fires or poorly maintained fixtures. Some spaces are going to be recognizable as deformed versions of the independent theme, but some have been completely changed to more nefarious purposes. And while
Like
both themes
cooking
employ
pizzas.
all of the various alternative pathing and traversal considerations that Khan detailed just earlier, the outlaw spaces are weighted more towards combat. But just because these spaces are more dangerous and the experience can be more combative, that doesn't mean that the archetype of the outpost is lost. So if you as a player choose to be a criminal working up your rep with a headhunter gang, you'd be welcome at the trading posts, and you'd be able to buy and sell items or take on missions. But you probably won't then be very welcome at the independent-themed locations, and that's where you'd get your combat experience.
That's what people hate.
So
They're like, wait, no, I want to go everywhere.
while the outlaw theme looks very different, the functionality of those archetypes still remain. So I've talked about the kinds of outposts we've been hard at work on, and I hope you've enjoyed checking them out over the last 2 days in the Pyro demo. It's really made me very pleased to see people playing our content at last. So
all right. So that was kind of the Pyro outposts with the colonialism style on an update. Here's sort of what they were doing in terms of Stanton, which was actually, I think, just an offshoot of the same stuff. It's still derelict style outposts. I think this was just an easy win if they put them in Stanton
these
as
new
well.
locations. More Our goal with these locations, as with many of the others we're going to hear about today, is to continue to work on the gameplay so that every location offers a rich playground to explore. And I guess I'd like to finish just by thanking everyone for listening today. It's really great to see you all. And I'm going to pass you over to Nick, who's going to talk about some locations that are coming in the nearer future. Thank you.
You guys made an awesome work. I'm super happy and proud to be here today to show you that, all of you guys, and to the world. So let's go to the chase and let me present you the new derelict settlement.
All right. So we've been playing this for, I think, 2 years now. And was it 2 years? No, these came right after this. These were, man, I don't even know when these were added. But we have had these for longer. And the point behind these was really just to increase the points of interest in Stanton with locations that weren't, like I said before, single room bunker sort of places. This was somewhere they could put more NPCs around. They could spread out the player base a little bit more with locations that actually took time to get around. They perform terribly, though. I mean, I don't know if these are performing better. I haven't used them as much in the last 6 months, but these were performing awful for a while just because of all the assets in there. But again, it's still part of that effort to just keep building out libraries of locations and assets and things that they can add to different locations eventually that will populate other star systems. Yeah, these were rough for a while. Are they working better now? Yay! You ever been going there for missions lately and they work like the rest of the game? They're running better? That's good. If they're able to optimize the locations, that's good. Oh yeah!
Pretty cool, guys, eh? Oh, by the way, we made more than 4. It's not just 4. We made more than that. So we split those settlements into categories, social and
All
hostile.
right, I think you guys have gotten the ideas from this. Now, let me show you an example of what a new point of interest looks like that's not being developed for a library or assets or anything like that. I don't know if this is really how they're going to build locations to look. I think they also made the rendering in this development or this little demo look better. The graphics look better. The lighting looks better. This is all future technology. So I wouldn't look at this and decide, oh, every place that we visit is going to look like this. But I do think that this is a little bit of a look at where they want these points of interest to go. What I'm getting from this is mainly just that it is a lot more of a self-contained location. The outposts we know now are placed onto the ground, and generally there's not much more effort put into them. With this, you can tell that there's more of an attempt to make an actual area, something akin to what we've seen from the base building development, where you can put down full ground panels that allow for a more structured surface. And we could see that there's a building here that looks like it would probably have a decent sized interior. Some different systems that I won't say are going to be powered by the resource network, but they probably will be, because that's how points of interest are going to be applied into the game. So I do think this gives us a little bit of insight into where they're going to go with these locations. These look a lot more built up, structured, and less like temporary outposts that have been sitting on the moon for less than 2 years, you know? Now, with that being said, comes the most, I'm going to say it's the most important part of this part of the video, but I actually have a little excerpt from here. This is a talk we're going to go into when we're talking about the missions and contracts later. But I think this also applies really well to the locations that we're talking about now, because this kind of lays out the whole philosophy behind how they want to apply missions to the game.
Always nervous about philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the philosophy going forward is that we try and keep make enough content to fill a planetary system to keep you there for a good long while.
That's the important part. I'll let him keep going, but I think that statement itself is super, super important to Star Citizen as a whole, because one of the things people hate is having to fly. I mean, I complain about it all the time while I'm playing, having to fly from planet to planet to planet for gameplay.
We're aware, travel times are a big investment and quite dangerous sometimes as well. So what we're going to do is, I take like Crusader, right? It's the first planetary system we built, and I'm sure everyone will be able to see that it's a lot more dense with content than the other planets. We want to get the other planets up to the kind of same parity with Crusader, and beyond, obviously. But,
and just for folks who maybe haven't been with the project since 2.0, Crusader, we're talking about the space around Crusader,
the space,
not the planet, which is
the
still
planet and its 3 moons.
Yeah.
You'll notice there are like space stations in there that don't exist elsewhere. They are kind of legacy things, these one-off builds that I'm sure we'll get to later, like how we're going to have abandoned rest stops and things like that. So we'll soon be making huge leaps forward in the content and the locations that we can add to the other systems.
Some leaps. Some leaps. So that is the driving philosophy, and that was actually stated before all these other videos that we've watched. So since he said that, they've been working on the libraries and getting that all together, but really it culminates in Starchitect, which is seems like what they want to be their solution for making enough points of interest that you can have planetary systems that provide you with the gameplay you want to have. And that seems to be what they're going with here. So here is the talk from last year. We'll look at this and then kind of talk about how this fits into everything else we've watched.
Thank you. Hello, Citizen Khan. All right. Those new planets and biomes were pretty, right? But it's time for phase-free civilization to give you some stuff to do. So, let's talk about location density. We've emulated nature as well as we can to make sure our planets are physically based and realistic, and our biomes are emergent. But it's time to start populating the verse, because where there's people, there are their lives and the structures they build. So it makes sense that whenever you go and explore these planets, that you find their lives. And what's even more important is that when we make these structures, that they use and they follow the same rules as our biomes, such as the jungles and the swamps. But before we continue, let's first take stock as to where we are now. At the moment in the verse, we have these custom, beautifully made locations, such as Ghost Hollow, we've got our distribution centers, or even just some outposts. And these have all been handcrafted by our designers and artists to hit that benchmark. And they've been working directly on the planet. However, going forward, this doesn't really scale with how we want to go forward with the game. Server meshing is about to arrive, and we're going to have a way higher player count. So those 73 bunkers across Stanton just won't cut it. But in general, it's also pretty barren.
This is already true.
There's not much for you to explore and find stuff out there. So there's no exploration gameplay. You haven't really put your character to use for the way that you should. So this means we need to go bigger, which means we need to change our workflow. And with any workflow means we need to first establish a new benchmark.
What's up, Shadowfire?
So, with our new benchmark, we are ensuring quality and improve on our previous work and make it even better. And any location that you'll find needs to have its own unique personality and no repetition. We don't want you to find the same location twice. This also means that this is your exploration and your findings. So when you go out there and explore with your Carrack or with your Corsair, is that whatever you find, you can share with your orgs or with your friends. As for that density, if you fly down to the planet, we want you to find something, let's say, every 100 clicks. But also improve the mission experience. So when you stay more on the planet, you're more immersed and you go from location to location. Just keep going. So going forward, we are modularizing all our existing locations and assets. And we're basically making a library of buildings and layouts that we'll be using to no longer work directly on the planet. The neat thing, all these modules and assets can be iterated upon and tested right in the editor for all the designers and artists to ensure fun gameplay and interactive sandbox activity, and also make sure all the mission stuff is there. Basically, we're building a toolkit. So let's look at some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we are making that toolkit. First and foremost, we've got our art style and branding. We've got things like Frontier for our settlements. We've got...
See these? See these two over here? I want them dead. Actually, I don't. They can stick around, but Jesus, I want to see them so much less in this game.
High-tech for the emergency shelters, but also utilitarian, like our bunkers and distribution centers. The richer the data...
So these are here's the three different types of architecture they have now. What's missing here is Henoism, which I think is the next one.
Richer these locations will be. Secondly, they all have a function. We've got mining for our mining outposts, farming for the farmsteads, or just places where people live. The function of the place will define the way the place looks as well, and its form. And last but not least, the people as well, the faction and their loadouts. We've got lawful people, like the new Citizens for Prosperity in Pyro, unlawful, such as Xenofred, and sometimes not even no one. And the place needs to look a bit, derelict. In different places, you'll find different people. So, now that we've made our toolkit, and we've defined all this new stuff, let's start building thousands of locations. Yes, I said thousands. So, to avoid the same issue of working on directly in the planet, I'd like to introduce to you Starchitect.
Hold on, I got one for
Starchitect
this.
allows us to do is directly on a planetary scale scatter all these new libraries and modules and assets and no longer work directly on the
There it
planet.
is.
And it uses the same logical rule set as our emergent biomes. And it also gives us full control over the data that we set on these locations. So expect locations in places where they make sense. Let's kind of look at all this new Genesis data and all these new libraries and chuck it into Starchitect and see what it gives us. As you can see, we're now able to make full-size locations, and they will look completely different based on where you'd find them. The layouts are controlled by the rules, and it will reflect its place in the verse. We've got farms, mining outposts, but even our older locations, such as the bunkers that you find on Stanton.
Yeah, honestly, Lucid, I doubt that would be the case. Enough content for their whole career around a planet? I don't know, man. I mean, yeah, maybe it could be for a while, but that'd get boring after some time. Like this, I understand what they're going for here. Everything is different. Different factions, different storylines, different planets, different ages of the locations. That's going to lead to a ton of variety, but it's still going to be repetitive at some level. Like there's only so much you can do.
We've got farms, mining outposts, but even our older locations, such as the bunkers that you find on Stanton.
It shouldn't get boring if they do enough, but like nobody's a miracle worker. I just can't see how a video game can possibly never grow stale at some point if you're in the same location all the time. Unless they're adding regular content to that location. But if you're talking about, let's say 15 star systems and you're saying, well, I want to focus on one planet, what are the chances that CIG is always going to be able to keep things fresh around that one planet as opposed to multiple locations? Not saying somebody shouldn't try to do that, just that I don't know about a whole career around one planet in this game.
So, let's look at an example and kind of use the tool to really, make a location. We can define the rules, as I've mentioned a couple times by now. So for our mining outpost, it wants to be near a resource. We can specify what this resource needs to be. But we can also give it suggestions where sometimes you'd find it here and sometimes you wouldn't. If the location has refineries, it might want to be near water to refine the resources. Then secondly, we can define what buildings should be there. So obviously we need mining buildings, houses for people to live as well, and even power buildings that we can leverage with the resource network. Starchitect will intelligently figure out where to place these and what needs to be at the location. Next up, farms. Its rules, well, temperature. Not every plant can live in every temperature, but the same with soil type. Only certain plants can be in certain grounds. And then we can query the seed map to determine what plants you would find there. What are the harvestables? As for the targets, again, farm buildings, obviously, power buildings.
The seed map! I mean, it makes sense, though. Especially because we can already see from the collection missions we're getting, you have to go to certain places to get certain things. If you know that there is an outpost that has a specific crop that you need to do a specific mission and other people don't know that, I mean, that's your knowledge of the seed map. That's your knowledge of how the planet works. It's your knowledge of the economy. And you can get a leg up. Leg up? Hand up? A finger up, maybe? We'll say a leg up.
Buildings, houses, but even animals, such as our beloved quasi-grazers. And last but not least, derelict ships. We've got these all over the place currently. Rules, well, they'd be close to anti-air because I would be shot down, but even in harsh flight conditions, such as mountains or low visibility, you'd probably most commonly find them. Targets, well, crash ship parts, of course. Sometimes you'd find the full remains of a javelin, and the other time you might just find the nose of a starfarer laying around. So, let's talk about coherency. Sure, we can scatter all these locations everywhere on the planet, and you'll find them in places they make sense, but we can do better. You don't just want to find an outpost completely on its own, right? We want to make sure it really feels like people have built their lives here. So, let's talk about some missing bits. We want to tell tighter stories, such as the people's lives, but also logical exploration. If I find one thing, I expect to find something similar or something else nearby. We also need more data control. What defines one mining outpost being different from the other ones, aside from the harvestables? And also give the narrative developments. Make sure people build near rivers, on mountains, they build near town halls, they build near distribution centers.
Honestly, I think this is kind of where they're going with these combat missions. I don't think they're quite there, and they need more mission givers and maybe more faction kind of developed missions. But these, I think we're seeing this before we see the actual location developments, because that sounds like that tool is still a ways out. While their contracts and the narrative content stuff that they're talking about here is actually starting to come into the game already.
But also logical exploration. If I find one thing, I expect to find something similar or something else nearby. We also need more data control. What defines one mining outpost being different from the other ones, aside from the harvestables? And also give the narrative developments. Make sure people build near rivers, on mountains, they build near town halls, they build near distribution centers. So to hit that bit of our benchmark, we make sure that locations are near each other and group them together. The effect it gives is a fully developed landscape with vistas and points of interest all over. And we group them together in what we like to call a cluster, like this one, that has 13 locations.
This is something that they're starting to do. Mainly in Pyro, we're seeing this. I'm actually kind of surprised sometimes, too, when I'm flying into Pyro, because it used to be not too difficult to see all the little small locations cluttered throughout. But if you're heading to an outpost here, you will find little tiny things here and here and out here and over here. And you don't notice them unless you see them by eye, because the scanning system right now is just not great. But I imagine at one point when you can detect all these locations, there will be things to do at each of them. And that's really exciting. I agree with you guys when it comes to the whole, they have plenty of space to throw content into these locations. I'm just hesitant as to how long it can last, but there's no doubt in my mind that at the very least, you're going to be able to get days, if not weeks, out of just spending your time in one area on one planet, building bases, doing crafting, finding resources, developing those resources, shipping them out, making money. It's a lot of opportunities with a system like this. I'm going to remain cautiously optimistic that they can pull something like this off. It would be very cool, but I'm still waiting to see what the next time they even talk about this is, because this is the last time they really went into detail, and this was in October. Town halls? Yes. Plenty of town halls, Everybody's got a town hall. Plenty of minerals down there. You got a little water well, a couple gold stashes, Good spot.
Let's talk about clusters. Clustering means generating locations near other locations. So, for example, if you find a distribution center, just like in the verse currently, I would find forward operating bases next to them. But if you go even further out, you'd find mining outposts to funnel those resources to the FOBs. Go out even further, you'd find caves around them, because that's where they might find some of the gems. And then we can even specify the data on a cluster level.
This is also kind of exploration gameplay. I'm not sure how often they're going to have derelicts and things like that popping up, but you'll definitely be able to, these caves, you can probably go out and remap them to, the resources will probably respawn and stuff. These will be the opportunities where you can go out to these locations, do some scans, take those scans back to a central spot and sell them for some money. And I think that is a part of how exploration gameplay is going to work.
All of the factions that live at this whole cluster, any mining outpost, that would be the same people, but also what commodities they sell, to find on what resource you'd find. So let's look at an example of the clusters. We have our mining cluster. Again, we can define what rules we should have. Rules, well, near a resource, just like our mining outpost, but also it needs to be on a lawful planet. We can target on a planetary scale where they would need to be. They need protection. As for the targets, well, caves, mining outposts, but even trade posts. Let's go to the other side of the spectrum. Before I do so, I forgot data. We can, on a cluster level, specify, again, what mineral commodities, but also what harvestable types you'd find are in that region. Now let's look at the other side of the spectrum, an unlawful cluster. What rules? Well, they need to be far away from any other cluster, because they want to be isolated and do their evil deeds on their own. And also on an unlawful planet, such as somewhere in the Pyros system. For the targets, outlaw outposts, crash ships, because they would shoot them down, and also ruins from just places they just completely overrun.
These are probably the kinds of locations you can have respawn and move around a lot more, especially in a place like Pyro, where they're basically saying, oh yeah, these places, they're always at war, they're always getting wiped out. This place is now this factions, that place is now that factions. And I wonder if you can actually change factions in these places, or if you just, you go in, you wipe everybody out, you take it over, and then you come back the next day and it's the same group of people at the same location. That's something we still really don't know how deep they're going to go on when it comes to reputation and security.
The data on this one, you'd find specific loadouts, and they'll be using weapons that you wouldn't find in any other legal system. And these weapons will be sold at the shops in these regions. So, now that we have a cluster, let's go even bigger. Just like our locations, we can put clusters near other clusters, and we group them together, ranging between 10 to 15 locations each. And we group this into what we call a sector.
Okay, I didn't.
Like this one.
Forgot it was a sector. That's pretty cool, though. I mean, sure.
That has about 120 locations. However, on a planetary scale, we can define how many sectors we should have, with each their own data and persona. And every single one of these locations is now ready for the mission system to hook up and give you gameplay, and for you to find a bunch of places on your own. And just on this side of the planet, can you guess the number? We've got about 3,042 locations.
And honestly, that's a lot of places for a planet. Like, you would want a planet to still have a lot of empty space.
This means that Starchitect, we're just able to...
So this whole system, this Starchitect system, I think it's interesting. And it's ambitious. And this could be incredible for Star Citizen. I mean, this could be the next step on top of their already pretty impressive planet tech that makes these planets make sense in a way that I don't think any other game of this scale has. This scale, I mean, like a game where you're going to different planets. I know, it's weird comment. I just don't know how viable it is. Like a lot of last year's CitizenCon, this was sort of like a proof of concept talk. And I love the concept, and I love the ideas behind it. It makes complete sense going off of everything else that we've watched through the course of their point of interest development. They are clearly trying to build out a bunch of different type of locations that they can easily replicate across spaces. But this is a little bit different from, say, when Will Haynes River Guy came on and showed us the new river creation tool. And he walked us through first how he was able to make a single river. Then he came back 6 months later and showed us how he was able to make those rivers better. And then he came back 6 months after that and he showed us how he was able to hit a button and the computer would do the same thing he had done 12 different times across a planet automatically. We didn't really get to see that here with this. We didn't get to see them say, okay, here's what Rastar will do, click, and then it creates a whole bunch of outposts. Yeah, with roads between them and a connective economic network. So this could be really cool in terms of putting the locations down, but it hasn't really been proven out as an actual process yet, or as an actual tool. And it also, I'm not sure it's going to work with like the rest of the game. Like, is it just locations? Let's go back and take a look at what they wanted to do for Quantum, now known as StarSim. The idea behind this was that every location in the game would hook into an economy that would simulate the passing of industry between those locations. The haulers, the security folks defending those haulers, the pirates preying on those haulers, the money that translates across the system, and the differences that makes in supply and demand at each of those locations. This was Tony Z's big thing, and while he worked a lot on it, and the team has worked on it, they have renamed it to StarSim, and they're doing stuff with it that we don't really know that much about. They haven't gone into the detail as to how this will work, so I don't even know how much of this supply and demand system is still planned. But to give you an idea of what, if we were to take what they originally wanted to do with the economy and plug it into what they're talking about with this point of interest location maker Starchitect, listen to this for a bit and just imagine what that would mean in terms of the complexity of making sure all of those locations are factoring into a constantly moving and changing economy.
And if you see, it continues to plummet. So those prices are pretty much falling off a cliff now from all that extra supply that's been brought on without us having to go back and rebalance anything. So let's go ahead and head on over to Cellin. And you can see that Cellin is in very close proximity to Crusader. So you've got an aluminum refinery and aluminum mining, yet there's very little activity. And the reason is because the aluminum at that mine is very difficult to extract. So let's go ahead and adjust the mining time on Cellin from 180 to 120.
There it is.
And what this again reflects is how difficult it is to extract from that particular location. And so you see there now, you see a few guys are actually willing to put in the amount of work necessary to extract it. Not all of them, it's still a lot of effort. And this comes back to every one of these guys having their own individual set of traits. So some of them were willing to endure, more risk, more, more effort, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead now and increase the laranite consumption.
Hurry up a little bit. We can jump ahead to the.
Let's just go with normal pace.
All right. There you go.
So let's make the laranite more difficult to work with and more rare and see what happens there. So we're going to adjust the global laranite refining time from 60 to 120.
We're adjusting the time on Walla to be.
We're going to do both. The global refining time, we want to take it to 60 to 120. And Walla's extraction time goes from 60 to 180.
That's right. Who's on fine?
60 to 120.
No.
Laranite. So what we've just done is basically make it more time consuming, more difficult to refine it, and we've basically made it more difficult to pull it out of the ground. So let's go ahead and apply a macro also to reduce the default purity of laranite from 50 to 16%, which means that refineries are going to need more ore to produce the same amount of refined product. We active? And now let's go ahead and take a look at the laranite prices on the Hurston factory. So we just did 3 different things to make it considerably, more expensive for laranite to be utilized.
Speed up that time.
And you speed it up, and you can see that laranite prices are going up. It looks like they're starting to skyrocket. This could be a complete economic disaster. If you notice, they're just going up, up, up. So what we're going to do now to bring that back into control is let's go adjust the power plant formula to compensate a bit. So let's adjust it from, instead of 2 laranite, let's change it to 0.1. So we just reduced the amount of laranite needed in the economy by 95%. And let's head back and check out the prices again. And what we should see here in a minute is laranite should start to drop off pretty significantly. And there you go.
Crisis averted.
And this will continue to drop if we watch it. You always get a little bit of turbulence because you've already got contracts, set up and stuff.
Right.
Go ahead and leave it in. I want to see it drop a little bit more.
We all want to see it, Tony.
So it's already down 40, 50%, and it'll keep falling. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add some additional factories. Delamar looks pretty dead. There isn't a lot of economic activity.
All right.
Happening over there.
This just goes on. But this whole talk is just a look at what they wanted the dynamic economy to be for Star Citizen. And as Lucid said in chat, just because they haven't said they're not doing this doesn't mean they're not doing it. I don't believe that they have canceled this or that they're not doing it, but they haven't clarified really how much of this is still here. So, guys, I don't know. I don't know. When they were doing this, obviously they didn't have Starchitect in mind. They also, things have changed when it comes to the development versus this. This was 6 years ago now. So I'm still waiting for them to give us a little bit of an update on what's going on with StarSim. They talk about it here and there. We're actually going to hear about it a little bit during this talk. I'll touch on StarSim a bit here, but there's not enough info to really know how deep it's going to be. So as far as locations go and points of interest go and how are they going to build more content into planets so you're not traveling around everywhere, that's mostly the summary. And I know that was like an hour-long summary, hour-and-a-half long summary for those of you who are watching on Space Tomato 2, but thanks for sticking around for it.